I still remember the exact color of the sky that evening. A bruised, dusty orange, the kind that makes everything look softer than it actually is. I remember it because it was the last ordinary thing I saw before my whole world tilted sideways. I pulled into the driveway after a 10-hour shift, tired in that bone-deep way only people who smile for strangers all day understand, and I saw my life sitting on the front lawn. Not boxed, not folded, just thrown. My mattress leaning against the mailbox. My clothes spilling out of garbage bags like someone had torn them open looking for something valuable. My grandmother's old reading lamp lying on its side in the grass, the shade crushed flat. And there was my younger brother, Tyler, phone held up high, grinning like he'd just won something. "Say hi to everyone, Madison," he called out loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Go on, smile. You're famous now." I stood in the driveway for a moment that felt much longer than it was, just staring at the scattered pieces of my life on display for anyone walking by. A neighbor 2 houses down had come out onto her porch to watch. Someone across the street had slowed their car, and there was my brother, filming all of it like it was entertainment. Welcome back to the Family Revenge Tales. My name is Madison Brooks, and before I tell you what happened after that night, I need you to understand who I was before it. Because the woman who stood on that lawn humiliated in front of neighbors and strangers on the internet was not the same woman who walked away from it 12 hours later. I was 26 years old, and for as long as I could remember, I had been the disappointment. Not because I'd done anything wrong. I hadn't dropped out of school. I hadn't gotten into trouble. I worked full-time as a claims coordinator at an insurance office, paid my share of the household bills every single month, and still, somehow, I was the one my parents introduced with a sigh. "This is Madison. She's still figuring things out." Meanwhile, Tyler, 2 years younger, running a struggling little logistics startup out of our parents' garage, was introduced like he'd cured something. This is Tyler. He's an entrepreneur. Nobody ever asked how Tyler's business was actually doing. Nobody ever noticed that it was I who was covering the grocery bill some months, or that I'd quietly paid off my mother's dental work the year before, or that I'd given up my own apartment 2 years earlier, not because I couldn't afford one, but because my father asked me to help out at home for a while. A while became 2 years. 2 years of being talked over, laughed at, treated like the family's cautionary tale, while Tyler was handed praise for ideas that never seemed to go anywhere. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that I knew my own worth even if they didn't say it out loud. But there's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly proving yourself to people who've already decided who you are. I had stopped expecting fairness from my family years before that night on the lawn. I just never expected it to go quite this far. I stood there that night watching 60, then 80, then over 100 people join Tyler's live stream. Comments poured in. Neighbors I'd known since childhood typed laughing emojis. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years wrote things like "finally" and "good riddance." My mother, Sharon, appeared briefly in the background of the stream, arms crossed, not stopping him. Not one word in my defense. My father, Douglas, said only, loud enough for the microphone to catch it, "She had it coming." I want to tell you I screamed. I want to tell you I cried right there on the lawn, but I didn't. Something in me went very quiet and very still, the way the world gets right before a storm actually breaks. I looked at Tyler, at his phone, at the small red dot showing he was still recording, and I said one sentence. "Okay." That was it. That was my whole response. I loaded my mattress into the back of my SUV. I gathered the garbage bags. I picked up my grandmother's broken lamp and held it against my chest like something precious, because it was the last thing she'd given me before she passed, and I was not going to leave it in the grass for strangers to laugh at. Then I got in my car and drove to a motel 11 minutes away, and I sat on the edge of a stiff bed in a room that smelled like old carpet, and I did not sleep. Instead, I opened my laptop. See, 3 weeks before that night, something strange had happened that I hadn't told anyone about. I had applied to refinance my student loans after getting a strong job offer from a firm in Cincinnati, and the loan officer, a woman named Renee, had paused on the phone in a way that made my stomach drop. "Miss Brooks," she'd said carefully, "I'm showing several other open credit lines under your name that don't match what you listed on your application. An SBA loan, a home equity line of credit, a business American Express account. Were you aware of these?" I wasn't. I had never applied for a business loan in my life. I'd never even had a home to put equity against. And when I pulled my full credit report that night, sitting in my car outside the bank, my hands actually shook. Over $90,000 in debt existed under my name. Every account was tied to my parents' address. Every single one was connected, in some way, to Tyler's company. I hadn't confronted anyone yet. I'd told myself I needed to be sure before I said anything, that maybe there was some explanation that didn't mean what it looked like it meant. I'd been quietly gathering information, terrified of what it meant, terrified of being wrong, terrified of being right. And then Tyler threw my life onto the lawn and called me a parasite in front of the whole neighborhood, and something in me shifted from fear into focus. If they wanted to treat me like I owed them nothing, then I no longer owed them my silence either. Sitting in that motel room, I called the one person in my family who had never once made me feel small. My Aunt Diane, my mother's older sister, a retired IRS criminal investigation special agent who'd spent 30 years chasing people who thought they were smarter than paperwork. "Madison," she said after I explained everything, her voice sharpening into something I'd never heard from her before. "Listen to me very carefully. Don't call your parents. Don't call Tyler. Freeze your credit tonight. All 3 bureaus. Screenshot everything. Save that live stream before he deletes it. Download the video, the comments, all of it. And don't sign anything, don't agree to anything until I get there." "Aunt Diane, what is this? What's happening to me?" There was a pause on the line, heavy and knowing. "Sweetheart, I think your family's been using your identity to fund your brother's business, and I think it's been going on a long time." I didn't sleep that night. I built a timeline instead, cross-referencing account opening dates with birthdays, holidays, the exact months Tyler's company had announced new equipment or office space. Every fraudulent account lined up perfectly with a moment my family had celebrated Tyler's success. I had funded my own humiliation without even knowing it. I sat there at 2 a.m, staring at spreadsheets, feeling something colder and steadier than grief settle into my chest. Diane arrived 2 days later and introduced me to Natalie Foster, a financial fraud attorney with a calm, unshakable voice and eyes that missed nothing. Natalie spread my documents across her conference table and went quiet for a long time, flipping through pages, occasionally circling a date or a name. "Madison," she finally said, "these applications were submitted from your parents' home internet connection. The verification calls were routed through a phone number registered to your mother. Your father is listed as a witness on 2 of the loan documents, and the funds, nearly all $90,000 of them, were deposited directly into your brother's business accounts." I sat there, hands folded so tightly my knuckles ached, and felt something crack open in my chest that had nothing to do with the money. "How long has this been happening?" I asked her, my voice barely above a whisper. Natalie looked at me gently. "Based on these dates, at least 3 years." 3 years of birthdays, holidays, family dinners where they'd smiled at me across the table. 2 weeks into building the case, my older sister Lauren called me, her voice trembling. Lauren had always stayed quiet, always smoothed things over, always begged me not to make things worse. I almost didn't answer. "Madison," she whispered when I picked up, "Tyler's iPad synced to the family iCloud by accident. I've been reading messages for 3 days. I can't stay quiet anymore." She sent me screenshots that made my stomach turn. My father, writing to my mother, "Madison's credit is clean. We should use it before she notices." My mother, responding to a bank's automated verification text on my behalf, pretending to be me. Tyler, celebrating in a family group chat the day the SBA loan cleared. "We're funded, everybody. Told you Maddie wouldn't even notice." "I should have said something years ago," Lauren said, crying now. "I watched it happen and I told myself it wasn't my business. I'm so sorry. I want to help you fix this." "Why now?" I asked her honestly. "Why speak up now and not before?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Because watching him humiliate you on that lawn was the first time I let myself really see what this family had become. I couldn't unsee it after that." Then came the discovery that broke something even deeper. My grandfather, before he passed, had set up a 529 college savings plan and a custodial investment account in my name, money meant to protect my future. I had always been told it went toward my tuition, that it had simply run out covering 4 years of school. But Diane found it had barely been touched for that purpose at all. Scholarships had covered most of my education. Somewhere along the way, over $150,000 had quietly disappeared, funneled out under fabricated educational expenses, feeding the same business that had just called me a parasite on the internet. My grandfather's careful gift, meant to give me a future, had instead built the very thing that had been used to humiliate me. I didn't want revenge born from anger. Anger burns fast and leaves nothing behind. I wanted the truth laid out so plainly, so completely, that no one could ever twist it into something else again. I asked my family to meet me at the public library, in a small private conference room with security cameras in the hallway and a receptionist who could hear everything through the glass. I wanted no shouting, no chance for my father to loom over me the way he always had at the kitchen table. Natalie helped me prepare individual folders, sealed, one for each of them, containing only the evidence that belonged to their part in it. Lauren sat beside me, not across from me, beside me. My father opened his folder first, jaw tightening as he read. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice already rising. "Everything we did was for this family." "I used my name without asking me," I said, quietly, keeping my voice steady even as my heart pounded. "That's not for the family. That's for yourselves." My mother was crying before she even opened hers. "We were going to pay it back, Madison. We always meant to pay it back." "With what?" I asked. "The house you never told me was refinanced? The account I didn't know existed? You had 3 years to tell me the truth. You chose a live stream instead." Tyler wouldn't look at me at first. When he finally did, his voice cracked in a way I'd never heard from him. "I trusted Mom and Dad. I didn't ask where the money came from. I should have." "You called me a parasite on a live stream that 100 people watched," I said, sliding his folder an inch closer to him. "I have the messages. I have your own words." He had no answer for that. None of them did. The room stayed silent for a long moment, the kind of silence that says more than any argument could. Natalie filed everything within the week. Identity theft claims, a civil fraud lawsuit, financial recovery actions. The SBA opened its own investigation into the loan. Banks froze every disputed account overnight. Tyler's remaining investors pulled out within days, and his business folded not long after. My father was placed on administrative leave from his position, pending the fraud review. My mother quietly resigned from the neighborhood HOA finance committee before anyone could ask her to. Mediation took place 7 weeks later in a room far less personal than the library, filled with lawyers and quiet, careful language. But the outcome was anything but quiet. My parents and Tyler were required to repay every fraudulent debt in full. They had to restore the money stolen from my college fund, cover all legal fees, and permanently close every account opened in my name. They signed sworn statements admitting in writing that I had never authorized a single one of those loans, and Tyler was required to post a correction on the very same live stream page that had humiliated me, admitting publicly what he'd done and why. I never responded to a single comment under that post. I didn't need to. The truth, once it was finally visible, did all the talking I never had to do. Months passed. My credit report cleared, one line at a time, until it looked the way it always should have. I accepted the position in Cincinnati, the one that had started this whole unraveling, and I used part of what was restored to me as a down payment on my first townhouse. Small, plain, entirely mine. I placed the rest into savings I don't touch, a cushion no one can quietly borrow against ever again. I started something else, too, something I'm especially proud of. A small nonprofit that helps young adults recognize and protect themselves from identity theft, especially the kind that comes from people who are supposed to love them. Lauren and I talk most weeks now. It's slow, rebuilding trust after so many years of silence, but it's honest, and honest is worth more to me than easy ever was. My parents and Tyler I keep at a careful distance. Some doors you don't close all the way, but you also don't leave them wide open anymore. I've made peace with that middle ground. One afternoon, months after everything had settled, Tyler called me. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered it. He asked the one question that had clearly been sitting with him the longest. Why didn't you ever defend yourself? That night on the lawn, when I was live, you just said, okay, and walked away. Why? I thought about it for a moment before I answered him, honestly. Because arguing with you would have just given everyone another show to laugh at. Evidence doesn't laugh, Tyler. Evidence doesn't lie, and it doesn't need me to raise my voice to be believed. He was quiet on the other end for a long time. I'm sorry, Madison. I really am. I know, I said. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it when I told him I hoped things would be different someday. I've thought about that night more times than I can count since then. The lawn, the phone held up high, the sound of strangers laughing at a story they only knew half of. And I've realized that what I found that night wasn't revenge, not really. It was proof. Proof of what had been taken from me, and proof of exactly who I was underneath all of it, once I stopped waiting for anyone else's approval to know my own worth. If this story moved you, if you've ever been the one blamed, the one mocked, the one everyone assumed was the problem, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the Family Revenge Tales. This channel exists for people like you and like me, people who've had to learn the hard way that silence isn't weakness, and that the quietest people in the room are often the ones building the strongest case. And if there's one thing I hope you carry with you after hearing this, let it be this. People who depend on your silence will often call you selfish the very moment you finally choose to speak the truth. Don't let that stop you. The strongest revenge was never really revenge at all. It's building a life so solid, so honest, and so entirely your own that their approval stops mattering altogether.
What makes a story like this valuable isn't just the drama of the betrayal, but what it teaches about protecting yourself in the real world. It shows the importance of checking your credit report regularly, freezing your credit when something feels wrong, and never assuming family loyalty makes you immune to fraud. It highlights how financial abuse often hides behind the language of love and sacrifice, and how documentation, not confrontation, is often the most powerful tool a person has. It also shows the value of patience and preparation over impulsive reaction, since Madison's calm, methodical approach ultimately achieved far more than anger ever could have. Most importantly, it reminds viewers that healing doesn't require revenge in the traditional sense. Sometimes the most powerful justice is simply telling the truth, backed by facts, and refusing to carry blame that was never yours to begin with.